I was standing near the back of the old stone chapel when I first saw the way her hands were shaking, and I remember thinking that no one else seemed to notice. Or maybe they noticed and chose not to look too closely, the way people often do on wedding days when the story is supposed to be simple and bright and already written. From where I stood, half hidden by a pillar that smelled faintly of damp limestone and candle wax, I could see the bride in profile as she sat in the small anteroom, her dress spread around her like a pale tide. Her name was Clara. I had known her a long time, long enough to recognize the signs she herself was trying to ignore. She was staring at her reflection in a gilt-edged mirror that had probably been hanging there since before any of us were born. Her hair had been pinned up with careful precision, each strand sprayed into obedience, and the veil rested lightly at the crown of her head like a promise she wasn't sure she could keep. Her face looked calm at first glance, luminous even, but if you watched closely, you could see the tension in her jaw, the way she swallowed again and again, as if something bitter were lodged in her throat. Her fingers twisted the ring her mother had pressed into her palm that morning, a family heirloom, gold worn thin by generations of marriages that had begun with hope and ended in various shades of compromise. I tell this story now because I was there when everything came apart, and because I saw how it all began long before that day. Clara had always been a thoughtful child, the kind who watched more than she spoke. When we were young, she used to sit on the front steps of her parents' house in the late afternoon, legs tucked beneath her, listening to the cicadas and the distant hum of cars. She once told me that she liked that hour best, the moment when the day tipped toward evening and everything felt suspended, undecided. Even then, she was attuned to thresholds. Her first love came early, the way first loves often do, slipping in unnoticed and then refusing to leave. His name was Jonah. They met when they were 16 in a borrowed classroom after school, working on a history project neither of them cared much about. He was lanky and quiet, with a dry wit that revealed itself slowly, and he never tried to impress her. That was part of what undid her. He liked her as she was, without needing to claim or define her. They spent long evenings walking aimlessly through their neighborhood, talking about nothing and everything, about how adulthood seemed both inevitable and impossible. With him, Clara felt spacious, as if her thoughts had room to stretch. The relationship ended the way many young loves do, not with a dramatic rupture, but with the slow erosion of time and distance. College took them to different cities, and calls grew less frequent, then stopped. There was no betrayal, no decisive moment that allowed for clean grief, just a quiet, lingering sense of something unfinished. Clara carried that with her, folded into the back of her mind, even as she dated others and learned the practical rhythms of adult life. Years later, she met Andrew at a friend's dinner party. He was attentive from the start, the kind of man who leaned in when she spoke, who remembered details and followed up on them. He sent good morning messages and planned elaborate dates. He told her, early and often, how extraordinary she was, how he had never felt this way before. At first, she found his intensity flattering, even comforting. There is a safety in being chosen so decisively, but over time that intensity hardened into something heavier. Andrew wanted to know where she was, who she was with, what she was thinking. He framed it as concern, as love. "I just want to be close to you," he would say, his eyes earnest. Clara tried to explain gently that closeness required space, too. He would nod, apologize, promise to do better, and then inevitably the questions would return, more insistent than before. When he proposed, it was with a ring so bright it almost hurt to look at. They were at a restaurant overlooking the river, the city lights trembling on the water below. People nearby applauded when she said yes, and she did say yes, smiling even as something inside her recoiled. Later, alone in her apartment, she sat on the edge of her bed and cried without fully understanding why. She told herself it was nerves, the magnitude of commitment. Everyone feels afraid, she reasoned. Love is a leap. The months that followed were a blur of planning and expectations. Her mother cried over fabric samples and guest lists. Friends gushed about centerpieces and menus. Andrew immersed himself in the details too, but his involvement felt less like partnership and more like control. He wanted everything perfect, and by perfect he meant aligned with his vision. Clara found herself conceding more and more, not just about flowers or music, but about herself. She stopped mentioning Jonah, though his name still surfaced in her thoughts at odd moments, unbidden, like a melody she couldn't quite forget. The night before the wedding, she dreamed she was back on those front steps from her childhood, the air thick with summer sounds. Jonah sat beside her, close but not touching. Neither of them spoke. When she woke, her heart was racing, and the room felt unbearably small. Now, in the anteroom, the weight of that dream pressed against her ribs. Outside, the chapel filled with guests, their voices a low murmur punctuated by laughter. Somewhere, a string quartet tuned their instruments, the sound thin and reedy. Andrew was waiting at the altar, no doubt rehearsing the vows he had insisted on writing himself, long and effusive. Clara imagined his face when she would walk toward him, the way his expression would soften into triumph. The thought made her chest tighten. Her father came in, straightening his tie, his eyes shining. "You look beautiful," he said, his voice thick. She smiled for him because she loved him, and because she had always been good at that. He took her hands, warming them between his own. "Are you ready?" The question hung there, deceptively simple. Ready? For what? For the ceremony, the applause, the photographs? For the marriage that would follow, the life that had been laid out before her with such certainty? She opened her mouth, closed it again. Her mother appeared in the doorway, already dabbing at her eyes. "I can't," Clara said finally, the words barely audible. They all froze. Her father frowned, not understanding. "What do you mean you can't?" She tried to explain, but explanation felt inadequate, like trying to describe a storm by listing the names of clouds. She spoke of feeling trapped, of loving Andrew, but not in the way she should, of a part of herself that had never let go of something else. Her mother shook her head, whispering about cold feet, about nerves. Her father's face went pale. "You can't do this," her mother said, her voice sharp with fear. "Everyone is here, Andrew." Andrew. The name landed like a weight. Clara stood up, her dress rustling like startled birds. She felt strangely calm now, as if the decision, once spoken, had settled something inside her. She thought of Jonah, of the way he had let her go without bitterness, trusting her to find her own way. She thought of Andrew's love, how it wrapped around her so tightly she could barely breathe. "I'm sorry," she said to no one and everyone. "I can't marry him." What followed was chaos. Raised voices. A bridesmaid crying. Someone ran to find Andrew, who burst into the room moments later, his face flushed, his eyes wild with disbelief. He begged her to reconsider, his words tumbling over each other, love turning quickly to desperation. "We can fix this," he said. "Whatever you're feeling, we can fix it." Clara listened, her heart aching. She reached out, touched his arm. "You deserve someone who can give you everything," she said softly. "I can't." She left the chapel through a side door, the cool air hitting her skin like a shock. Outside, the sky was a clear, indifferent blue. She kicked off her heels and stood barefoot on the gravel, her dress trailing behind her. For a moment she laughed, a sound that startled her as much as anyone else. It wasn't joy exactly, but it wasn't despair either. It was the release of something held too long. I watched her go, the white of her dress receding down the path, and I wondered where she would end up. She didn't know herself. She only knew that the future, suddenly unwritten again, felt terrifying and vast and honest. Love, she would learn, is not just about being chosen or choosing in return. It is about the courage to step into the unknown, even when it means breaking hearts, including your own. And as she disappeared from view, leaving behind the wreckage of a day meant to be perfect, I understood that some stories don't end where we expect them to. They simply open into something else, and we have to follow, not knowing where we'll land.